Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Good morning everybody and welcome to our council meeting for Wednesday the 25th of March 2026, and a warm welcome to people here and online. Now before we get started I will ask the Deputy Mayor to open with karakia.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā, tēnā tātou katoa. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnā koe, Your Worship, kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. All right, number 2 on our order paper is apologies, and I don't have any, nothing from the floor. Oh, sorry, we do. It wasn't listed there. That council receive apologies from Councillor Finlay for early departure. I'm happy to move that. Second by the Deputy Mayor. There's nothing else. We will vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Apologies, Mr Mayor, it's not strictly related to the item, but this screen isn't working. I don't know if staff are aware.
Oh, okay. Yep, sorry, I didn't realise that it was that screen. I thought it was another one. You'll have to, yeah, we've had some issues with the screens, which we're trying to get on top of with IT. It's, yeah, we didn't have that one working last week. So we're going to unfortunately have to look to the bigger screens for those people on that side. Apologies.
Might need to scroll in on it a bit then for us, please. Thank you.
We'll enlarge the text slightly. There we go. It's starting to happen already. Okay, so we have those apologies there. I'm happy to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Can you vote, please? Has passed, 16 votes for and none against. All right, moving through to notification of additional items. I have none. There's nothing from the floor. All right, moving to number 4, any declarations of interest. Councillor Isabella.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I've got an interest in items 17 and 25, so I'll remove myself for those ones. It's a Regent Trust extension and DRC appointments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to declare an interest in item 25 as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. All right. We will, sorry, I've probably missed the housekeeping. If I could go back to that. I'm trying to get through. We've got 27 things on the agenda, so you can sense I'm moving at pace. All right, just in terms of housekeeping, the meeting has been recorded. It's been live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of housekeeping and health and safety, in the unlikely event of an emergency on hearing the alarm, we will leave via the nearest fire exits, those green signs, and we will assemble at the clock tower in the square Te Maraehine. In terms of health, it's a non-smoking and vaping facility. A defibrillator is located in the entrance on the ground floor. Our toilets are in the link span as you came in, and any incident, please report that to our committee administration here. All right, we're going to go, before we go to minutes, we have one public comment, and I'll invite Bernice Adlam up from the BID. Welcome, Bernice, and you have 3 minutes to speak to us.
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Bernice Adlam. We own the Spates Ale House in town, and I'm co-chair with Vern Wilson for the Palmy BID. We just noticed, late notice it was that there was an agenda item, Urban Bus Terminal Waiting Lounge and Bus Drivers Lounge on the agenda, and we felt the need to come along today and just let you know what our thoughts are. So we met with Palmy Bid, which represents the stakeholders in the city centre, has serious concerns about the number of aspects of the proposal, the bus terminal location, and some aspects of the inner city, of the inner square routes used by the buses. We met with the Mayor and senior officers 2 weeks ago and it was agreed we could explore this further. Palmy Bid has taken the extraordinary step to seek specialist advice on this and to either allay the concerns or confirm them. Unfortunately, our concerns were confirmed and some constructive solutions and the way forward has been offered. This will take some time, but can happen without delay if the council is in good faith and willing. We ask that all decisions in the meantime are placed on hold. We've got concerns especially around homeless people. Obviously, it's a major problem throughout our city. Our members are continually telling us how difficult it is to have retail shops with homeless people floating around their door, stopping people coming through. We do believe that those homeless people will relocate to our brand new gorgeous hotel. And I'm sure everyone around this table would not like to see that for that business owner. It would just be a disaster for our visitors and a disaster for this council who's trying to promote something fantastic in the middle of our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice. All right. We will move that. We've received the public comment. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by Deputy Mayor. And if no comments, we will vote. Oh. We'll try again. If you could vote now, please. Has passed, 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, moving through to confirmation of minutes, number 6 on the order paper. And we have our minutes from the ordinary council meeting of 11th of February 2026, part 1. And I'll take part 2 at the same time to be confirmed as true and correct. I'm happy to move those, seconded by Deputy Mayor, thank you. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote. And that has passed, 16 votes for and none against. All right, we move through to number 7, which is the Urban Bus Terminal Waiting Lounge and Bus Drivers Room. And I'll invite David Murphy, Glenn Bunny and Mark from Horizons Regional Council to speak to us. Thanks. That's page 21 of your papers.
Morena koutou, elected members, Mr Mayor, thank you for that intro. You know Glenn well, and Mark is a familiar face to you, the Manager Transport Services at Horizons Regional Council, who we work closely with on a range of public transport matters, including this project. So just briefly to introduce it, and then Glenn, Mark and myself are obviously available for any questions. Following that, we'll largely take the paper as read. I think the opportunity to establish the Urban Bus Terminal Waiting Lounge and Bus Drivers Lounge is obviously detailed in the report. A couple of points I'd just like to emphasise. The funding environment for a new or significantly upgraded urban bus terminal is not great at the moment with the GPS for the government policy statement for transport. So obviously this is a way of enhancing the current service and supporting the good work that the Regional Council have done in the last year or two with enhancements to the service. So effectively building on what we have rather than building new. The proposal has good support from the tenant, obviously, who we've been working closely with. As we heard from this morning from Palmy Bid, there are stakeholders in the city centre that have concerns about the bus terminal in its current location and would see this project as, I guess, reinforcing it in its current location. What we would say to that is the city centre indicative business case work is close to being finished. That does reinforce the current location as the preferred location for the bus hub, bearing in mind that work is yet to come back to the chamber. And as we said, this is a relatively discreet way of enhancing the service, the terminal, that exists at the moment and supporting the upgrades to the service. So we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anything from the others? Mark?
Maybe just to add that, obviously this paper or similar item went to Horizons Council yesterday and was supported by Council. So the figures you see in there on the table around costs, Horizons have put our commitment to, and obviously now you're seeing your side of that, and we're working very closely with our operator Transit, who are part of this agreement and plan as well.
Thank you.
Just on that as well, the NZTA investment advisors have confirmed the NZTA subsidy as well.
Okay. Okay, number of questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, team. A few questions from me. I can't see the term of the lease in this paper. What term are we signing up for?
We haven't had detailed conversations with Safari about that to date. Obviously, even this paper just puts the opportunity to the annual budget, assuming the recommendations are passed today, and then it is deliberated as part of the annual budget and confirmed. We would then obviously start more detailed conversations with the landowner developer. But I don't know whether, Glenn, you've had any thought to that, but we simply haven't had, we don't want to preempt the conversations until there's a budget to discuss those matters.
All right, so how did we come up with the conclusion of $690 to $700 per square metre if we haven't had conversations with them about it? Do we even know the space is available?
Well, we have had conversations with them in general about the concept and what it would cost, but we haven't had detailed conversations about the lease arrangements.
Okay, what sort of term would we want to pursue? Or given Horizons is leading it, what sort of term are they wanting to pursue?
At yesterday's meeting, perhaps I can help the gentleman, because I represented council at yesterday's Horizons meeting. Good question, because that was asked actually at Horizons. Because it's a little bit of a step into the unknown, the 3+3 was put on the table, but again, no decisions have been made on that. And as the officers have said, councillor, the negotiations would start once there's been given a nod, if that's where the council goes, to proceed. So it's more of a short term rather than a long term sort of basis, but yeah, that's what was discussed at Horizons.
All right, I'll move on. Given the public comment we heard this morning, what engagement have we had with the inner city and BID in particular on this project? It's certainly news to me when I saw it in the papers. Has this been circulated in the community to see if there's an appetite for this?
No, it hasn't, but certainly, again, if the budget is referred in a public environment, then obviously the annual budget process would be an opportunity for people to provide their views on whether or not they support the budget.
Okay. I recall at the long-term plan, I think it was Councillor Barrett put up a motion for us to look at relocation of the bus terminal to the square. I could be wrong, but I recall there was a motion around those lines. So I'm surprised to hear you say today, David, that we're pretty much fait accompli, the bus terminal will remain where it is. Can I just understand where that work got to?
I wouldn't say it's, I mean, as I said, I qualified my comment that the city centre indicative business case work is yet to be finalised and brought to this table, but certainly the work done to date on that supports the current location for the terminal going forward. Obviously that will be a decision for the council in the medium to long term if they wanted to invest in a different location. As I said at the start of my introductory comments, the funding environment for a new terminal or a significant upgrade to the current terminal is not positive in the medium term, so this was seen as a way of enhancing the terminal in its current location.
All right, and my final question was, with the disestablishment of Horizons on the table, does that mean that the total cost of Horizons plus PNCC would fall on the council in the short to medium term?
I mean, whatever happens with the regional council or the city council or other councils in the future is, I think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge. Ultimately, public service for public transport will still have to be delivered regardless of who's delivering that service.
All right, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, team. I just got a couple of questions. Mine are around safety. Have the Safety Advisory Group been advised of this proposal, and have they had any comment on this proposal?
The short answer is no. There hasn't been broad engagement around this opportunity. The team have been working quite closely to pull it all together for today. As we said, it's referred to the annual budget, and that will provide an opportunity, given that this is obviously a public decision for the likes of that entity or others to submit on the annual budget.
Have we had, given the concerns around the homeless people that the public comment was brought up, has that been raised with the Safari Group?
Not specifically. I mean, the report does touch on any public space investment. There's a risk that people who are having a more difficult time than us look for areas where they can spend time. That's the reality with any public space investment. One of the things we've said, and it's touched on in the report, is the way in which this, if the budget is referred to the annual budget and it was approved, the way in which the space is designed would be critical to addressing any safety issues through the use of SEPTED. It's a highly glazed frontage, so it's very open, highly visible space, and would be looking, if the budget was approved, we'd be looking to activate the area as much as possible. So that's the idea of whether there's a coffee kiosk or other supporting activities like bike parking. The more these public spaces can be used, then the safety increases.
Last question, what are the alternatives to this location?
For the bus terminal itself or the waiting lounge?
Both.
Well, there's a range of alternative locations for the terminal that would potentially be explored. That would be a significant process to explore other sites in detail. I'm not aware of any other explicit opportunity regarding land or buildings for a bus terminal waiting lounge.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chamber, good morning. Just heard that there was a recent meeting with BID and Council. Was this proposal, the waiting lounge, was that discussed in that meeting?
That meeting was about the council listening to Palmy BID. So Palmy BID, as you heard, have undertaken some analysis around their thoughts on the current location and potential future locations. I'm sure that work will emerge and be shared with the council at some point in the future, but the purpose of that meeting was for the council to listen to Palmy BID.
Okay. We know that bus routes have changed in the city, and there's lots of bus shelters that need pulling out, and I think there's lots of bus shelters that still need reinstating. How many of each, and what's the cost to put those bus shelters in that need putting in, please?
I'm not sure that's, Council, that's not really what we're discussing. We're discussing the inner city terminus idea.
Well, it all comes down to cost though, I guess, sir.
Yep, so direct the cost question to the officers, not a...
Okay, I'll withdraw that question, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just come back on this safari question? The comment from the BID was they thought the hotel would be against this, putting the bus terminal, keeping the bus terminal there and having the lounge there. Can you comment specifically on Safari's view on this, please?
Safari are supportive of the bus terminal in the current location and are supportive of the bus terminal waiting lounge and bus driver's lounge.
Okay, thanks for that. And are Safari aware of the Business Improvement District's concerns about the impact of putting this facility in the new hotel?
I understand there's been some conversations between members of the Palmy Bid Board and Safari regarding the bus terminal and its current location, but it's not for me to comment about the nature of those conversations, but I'm aware there has been interaction.
There's been an opportunity for the bid to raise those concerns directly with Safari, as far as you're aware. Thank you. In your report, it's probably a David question, 2.2, you're talking about what the lounge might look like, the facilities it might offer. You say the waiting lounge could also could provide supporting amenities such as coffee cart, food and drink vending machines. Would there be an opportunity for conversations with the bid about the impact and opportunity there? Just conscious of the opportunity that's there of having a waiting room there, the opportunity for our brick and mortar retailers to leverage that. We have a lot of cafes around that space. They might be uncomfortable with vending machines, say, in that space. Is there an opportunity for a discussion there about what actually goes in there?
Most definitely. There's been obviously no detailed design done on the fit out. I guess what we're trying to emphasise in the report, and it relates to the question from Councillor Harper earlier, is the more it can be a multi-purpose facility, the likelihood that the safety will be enhanced. So, whether it's a vending machine or a coffee cart or the e-bikes, there are examples of ways of activating the space. The way in which we do that, who provides those activities, opportunities for partnership with businesses are all on the table.
And how would that conversation be advanced should we get past this?
Well, certainly if the recommendations are passed today and then the budget was ultimately confirmed as part of the annual budget process, then we would obviously look to engage with relevant stakeholders, including the bid.
Okay, thank you, David. And a final question, just in terms of the language of the recommendation that Council refers a budget to the annual budget deliberations, is the intention that this is then debated to go into the annual budget, or is the intention that this would be referred through to being included in the annual budget?
Certainly the intent of the recommendation is that it's put on the table as part of the annual budget deliberations, not that it's confirmed today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, David and team. Just remind us, how long is it since there's been a waiting lounge for the bus passengers in Palmerston North?
15 years. Probably goes back. I mean, I don't recall when, from a Horizon perspective, when there was a period in place for.
Would it be 10 years or more?
More than that, 15.
Yeah.
15. Okay.
At least 15, and beyond that, yeah.
And how many times have we applied to NZTA for funding for a bus terminal and been knocked back?
There's been various proposals for upgrades or new terminals over the last 20 years. None of those have progressed for a whole bunch of reasons: lack of business case, changes in funding, council deferring budgets. So yeah, there's been I would say close to a 20-year conversation about the current location and design of the urban terminal. And how are people waiting at the moment? What are the facilities like there?
There's obviously the shelters that exist over at Main Street there. They provide some level of protection and seating for people waiting. I would say if it rains, people will most likely get wet. If it's windy, they'll most likely be cold. So to some extent, there is shelter there, but it's not the most effective in terms of if someone's waiting for any period of time.
And what about the bus drivers? What facilities do they have at the moment?
So our main operator, Transit, do currently lease a space a little bit further from the bus hub for their drivers in the city centre. If this were to proceed, the proposal in its current form, they would effectively move that investment that they have in that space to the new bus driver facility. So it's not all additional or public money going into it. It is also private money from the operator to this more enhanced space for them and their drivers.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of bus user numbers, that's probably a question for you, Mark. Like we hear that there's been a big increase since Horizons changed the timetable. So can you confirm what the increase has been?
Yeah, so comparing the last full year we had under the old bus network, sort of 2022-23 to last year, we were up 70% last year, so 7-0, since the previous network, and we are continuing to see really strong growth now through this period still. So we haven't yet reached that peak, I would say.
So still increasing?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the petrol prices as they are. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson's covered some of my questions. I guess my remaining ones related to consultation and to the point that was raised earlier, would we undertake to get views from bus service users and drivers as well as the business community so that we get the whole stakeholder input?
Is that in relation to the concept in general, or the more detailed design, assuming the budget's approved, or both?
Well, the concept in general.
Yeah, well, certainly we can. I mean, obviously, you'll be aware the annual budget process has started. We can look at means and ways if the recommendations were passed today of alerting users to the fact that it's been referred to the annual budget and they may want to submit. And certainly if the recommendations were passed today and the budget was approved, we'd be certainly looking to engage with stakeholders as part of detailed design of the two facilities.
Thank you. And I know that Auckland City has a bus terminal and a waiting lounge at Sky City, which is quite a high value property. Are there known issues of the sort that have been raised today? Has that been a disaster for that particular property? Does anyone know?
I can't talk to that particular example, but there are certainly in other centres around New Zealand, high profile waiting areas, Hamilton, Christchurch, Nelson, all have relatively new spaces, which from what I've seen, sorry, this is anecdotal, and I haven't heard anything through my official channels either, operate really well and positively for those users.
Okay, so there is a precedent for this type of development?
There certainly is precedent for this type of development, and it's not just bigger cities, it's not just your Aucklands, your Wellingtons. Similar sized centres to Palmerston North do have this as part of their public transport network.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of questions. I presume the facility will be locked at night when the buses stop running?
That would certainly be our assumption, yes.
Okay, and I'm looking at your budget. Is there you've got no budget there for security whatsoever? During the day, are you going to have anyone there looking after it or making sure that the patrons are safe, that the homeless people don't cause trouble? Is it just going to happen, or is it just not going to happen? What are we going to do about that?
Our current assumption is that it's not staffed, and as we indicated in the answer to some earlier questions, the way in which we design and activate the space will be aimed at minimising any safety risk.
So you'll be depending on the police to keep the users safe?
SEPTED would be the primary tool to keep users safe, so crime prevention through environmental design, so thinking about the way in which we design the space and it's used. But like any safety issue, if there are concerns of that are a public risk, then we'd expect people to ring the police.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David, Mark, and Glenn. Just a couple questions left. If this goes through today and comes back into the annual budget debates, will there be further information resolving some of the optionality that's in front of us today, or will it still just be a straight line item, yes or no?
Just clarify what you mean by optionality. And
Well, so it's talking about we could fit out with a coffee cart or bike racks, or, you know, there's a whole lot of ors in there in terms of how it would actually function. Will there be more information to hand in May about, yeah, the physical configuration and some of the, yeah, options there?
well, yeah, we won't have a budget to do more detailed design between now and May. But we can certainly give some further thought to obviously talking with, if there's an indication from council today that they're willing to entertain the idea as through the annual budget, then we can have some more detailed conversations with the landowner developer and give some further thought to that. As we said, at the moment, there's been no explicit budget to do detailed design, but we can do our best to provide as much detail as possible during the deliberations.
Great, thank you. Mark, in terms of the current operations of the bus hub there, can you just take us through what is provided in terms of security services around that area?
Currently, Horizons do fund security at the Terminal 3 afternoons a week for a couple of hours. That was instigated a few years ago when there were a larger number of issues, a lot of it around sort of youth behaviour and safety concerns at the terminal at that time. We were doing 7 days a week. We've scaled it back to 3, and there is some CCTV going on at the terminal very shortly. And after that, we anticipate to be reducing our security again, but we'll continue to monitor that. So that is currently the only thing provided by Horizons. I'm not aware of anything else active in that space, though obviously there are other programs as well throughout the city centre.
Great, thanks. And how effective in general have those responses been?
I would say it's generally positive, though we constantly keep an eye on I guess the value we're getting from that security on site, and I would say that in the current environment it's probably coming to the end of its natural life in terms of the issues that we were seeing a couple of years ago when we did put that in place.
Thanks. If in future, you know, disruptive behaviors, et cetera, were there that were more associated with a waiting lounge space than with the actual bus lanes, would those sort of security services be able to be deployed more broadly, and would that be resourced by Horizons?
In terms of supporting the public transport network, that is possible. I would say things like the funding for the waiting lounge and security is funded by NTTA under the same sort of facilities management type process. So that's all eligible for NTTA funding in the same way, and it is possible for us to respond in that way should we need to. Obviously, as David said, we don't want to necessarily need to be able to do that, and we'd love that space to be able to operate as safely as possible on its own.
Understood, thanks. And just finally, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to understand what this means in terms of the, I guess, longer term prospects around the, you know, bus hub business cases that have been developed, in particular, resolving the gap between where the intercity bus services run out of and where the urban bus services run out of. Does committing to this path prevent us from a future where we could see those services co-located?
I think my qualified answer to that would be no. Obviously, it's a reasonable investment, but it's not an investment that would potentially commit the city to a 10, 20, 30-year commitment to that location. As I said in my introductory comments, the funding environment for a significant upgrade or new terminal in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think is positive. So this would be, as I said, would be seen as a way in enhancing the current terminal, given that we anticipate we're likely to be there in the short to medium term.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the report. Just looking at page 24 at table 1 and the funding arrangements from the other partners. I'm interested, in response to Councillor Wood's question, you mentioned that the term of the lease hadn't been yet defined, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the commitment from the other partners, NZTA Transit and Horizons, what is the commitment to date for their part of that?
Sorry, are you talking about the numbers in the table in terms of?
Yep. Table 1, the 20,000 from Horizons, 31,000 from NZTA, 19.5 from Transit. So is that just a 1-year commitment at this stage, or is it a multi-year commitment?
That would all expected to be ongoing throughout the life of the facility. So yeah, that's effectively per annum cost, yes, to each of those organisations.
Thank you. And just interested in the 3.9 says that council will be responsible for the lease arrangements with the Safari Group. I'm just interested to understand what the reason for council taking the lead on this as opposed to Horizons, if the bus service is predominantly run by Horizons.
Yeah, typically the council is responsible for infrastructure to support the service. So for instance, the bus stops, the terminal itself on Main Street. So, while this is clearly a shared project in terms of the way it's been put together and funded, the traditional approach has been that the council is responsible for supporting infrastructure, which this is.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kuru.
Do we own any property within the area that we could repurpose so we could collect the income or the lease from the other partners, is a question.
I've got a nod, a no from Glenn, but I'm not aware of any other council property in the vicinity of the terminal that could operate as this space.
Okay. Could we repurpose eyesight?
Certainly, I mean, there was some conversations amongst officers regarding the eyesight when this proposal came forward. I guess the challenge is it sort of sits between both and is unlikely to be it's that while it's a stone's throw from the urban terminal, it's probably too far to walk when you're sort of waiting maybe 10 minutes for a bus because you're going to walk, wait, come back. Whereas, as we talked about in the report, this site immediately fronts the terminal, so you can walk, out of some glazed doors straight into the bus terminal.
Okay, and my last one, just around why NZTA are happy with this proposal and why not the other ones, just what the difference has been, do you think? Just wondering.
I can't speak to, previous projects put forward around a full redevelopment of the bus terminal, though I do know that obviously the quantum of that compared to this is very different. So the funding here effectively fits under the Horizons funding envelope for public transport. So we will be generating the NZTA co-funding through our programs, and then it's the broader funding for PNC, Horizons and Transit is paying sort of the local share, so the non-NZTA portion of that. So that's another reason for Horizons to be involved. As David said, PNC traditionally manage the PT infrastructure, but in this case we're able to generate that co-investment, given it's also a much lower quantum per annum.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to understand fully the assumption for operating costs, do they include insurance, power, cleaning, any rates?
I'm just trying to, I remember we put a sentence in the paper about that. What we have said is that, paragraph 3.6, is assume that the maintenance costs in 26, 27 would be minimal because we'd be actually constructing it. But as part of, if the budget was approved and the facility was constructed, as part of preparing the 27 LTP, we'd obviously have to budget for maintenance and cleaning. But we don't see that being a significant cost.
But otherwise, it is quite encompassing of the insurance and other rates and other operating costs. I just want to understand it's not just a covering off the...
Glenn Bunny, manager property. The lease rate that Safari have put to this opportunity is inclusive of those OPEX costs.
Right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora koutou. Can I also just check, is the assumption that this will be only open during work hours, or is it a 24/7 facility?
Just checking with my colleagues, my assumption is that it would be open while the bus service is open.
So I know that some services arrive at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Would it be open then? Transit?
When David says bus service, the urban bus service, so runs from about 6:30 a.m. to about 9 p.m.
Oh, so we're not talking about all the transit services, just the urban ones?
The urban Palmerston North bus service.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to 2.6 about not being staffed, is that an assumption, or is that an opportunity that could arise if we move later to look at this more closely?
Well, certainly that would obviously add cost. The assumption is that if it's well designed and well utilised and activated, then it wouldn't need to be staffed.
Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, I'm sorry to come back in, but just going back to the budget again, I don't see any setup costs there. Have they been incorporated, or where's the initial furniture, et cetera, coming from?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. The $200,000 capital reflects the fit out of the space.
Okay, so that's to cover the whole shebang.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, you're released. I think everybody, there might have been one council or two councillors that didn't speak, so thank you. Lots of questions there, very topical. So, look, colleagues, we have recommendations there that council refer to the annual operational budget of 82,000 to the 26-27 annual budget deliberations to lease space in the Wyndham Hotel development for an urban bus terminal waiting lounge and bus driver's room, subject to confirming co-funding with the net cost to Palmerston City Council estimated to be $10,746 per annum. 2, that council refer the capital new budget of 200,000 to the 26-27 annual budget deliberations to support the fit out and establishment of the urban bus terminal waiting lounge and bus driver's room, subject to 50% of the capital cost being co-funded by Horizons Regional Council. I'm happy to move, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Look, colleagues, thanks for all your questions, and obviously it's an opportunity that's popped up with a supportive private partner. So I think it is short term, so I think a lot of you are jumping to where the bus terminus is going to end up being, and as the office is yet to be decided. As we know, we've had several cracks at it, certainly while I've been here for 13 years, and we basically got back to where we are. And any new build or any new decision, there's no money there at this stage. There's always a possibility that something might pop up in terms of another funding cycle, but realistically it's going to be years away with any new budget there. So it is short term, but this is public and private coming together, and it's hugely going to improve the PT experience for quite a minimal cost. You know, we had 12 million in our budget there at one stage for a capital new terminus. So this is, to me, a bit of a no-brainer. And look, as I said, it's a great example of public-private coming together to enhance and make the whole experience and safety of bus users, public transport users better. And evidence is when those improvements are made to any of those sort of terminuses, how they're designed, etc., there is less antisocial public risk behaviour. I went to see Nelson and looked at Nelson's, and very similar to this, with a public terminus room. The buses pull up outside. It isn't staffed, but there's lots of opportunities to get a coffee, to see other things that are happening around the city, i.e. some notices on what is going on around the city at the time. Downtown Auckland at the Sky City has again another private bus terminus, and other cities as well. Hamilton's another example. So it's nothing new, using existing premises, so we don't have to build everything. Some of the comments or some of the issues raised by the bid, and yes, they did come to see us with their planner, there was two main issues there raised. One was the site. They were keen to see it moved, be fair to say, and that has been a view from some members of the bid, and that has been a long-held view for many decades. But it'd be fair to say, Safari, and I just checked with them again this morning because I knew this question would come up, are they, to double check, are they okay with what's happening? Absolutely they are. Did they know about the antisocial behaviour and everything else? Of course they did. In fact, it was worse before they started the construction. So these guys have built 18 of these, some of them directly opposite other bus stops in Auckland and Queenstown. They see it as a good thing. So just the other thing too was for the bid people was the routes too, and we did have some sympathy around the routes and stopping around the square, and that's been an issue for some time. That's more of a horizon sort of conversation around the routes, but it is something that perhaps should be looked at, and it was something that we agreed that we would perhaps have a look at again at. Other things were around relocating it right into the middle of the square with the regional buses, and again we've explored that many times around this table. That could possibly happen, but we would seriously hinder our event space in the middle of the square to Maraehine, and we've just seen recently some activities happening there which probably wouldn't happen if we had all the buses there. It'd be very hard to move them all. So look, I think this is a high quality all-weather waiting lounge for bus users. It will also provide an opportunity, as I said, to display information around any sort of transport related, councils related material. There could be amenities, and again, nothing's been decided, but you could have a stand-up coffee cart. There could be some vending machines. There could be secure electric bike chargers, all those sorts of things. Again, just think it is short term, so we're not locking ourselves into something that's, it is a little bit of a trial, and for the amount of money that's from a council perspective, I don't think you could get much better than this. This is as good as it's probably going to get in terms of the cost. So I'll open it up, and there is a number wanting to speak, so Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm very supportive of this proposal, and I'll talk you through my reasons why. The first one is, and I just did a quick Google, it was actually in 2014 that the terminal on Pitt Street closed down, and so there's been no undercover waiting area for bus passengers for 12 years in the city. And I don't know if any of you have been to wait for a bus down in Main Street, but I have. And I'm sorry to say, it's a wind tunnel. Palmerston North Rain doesn't come down horizontally. Vertically, sorry. It comes horizontally. And it's very hard to get any shelter there. And if you think that the bus users often tend to be elderly people or young people or families with young children, it's not a nice environment to be waiting for a bus, full stop. Secondly, there's been a huge increase in the number of people using buses since Horizons improved their fleet and their routes. And I think there was 1.2 million trips on buses last year. So that's a lot of people waiting for buses. Main Street is the sort of connection between lots of routes. So I think we're talking about certainly thousands of people waiting in Main Street without any indoor shelter. And I'm just not convinced by the argument that thousands of people should stand out in the cold and rain because of the risk of antisocial behaviour from a handful of people. It just doesn't wash with me. I think that this is an extremely cost-effective way of doing it. I mean, it looks like we'd only be paying, you know, just under $24,000 in the first year to get this done. That's not a huge cost for what we're going to get for it. And as well as that, it will, I think as the officer said, activate that part of the square and actually make it safer. If you've got, you know, visibility onto the street, visibility into the room, more people using the area, it will actually be safer than it is currently. And I do recall in recent annual plans that we've had young people, I think some girls from Girls High came in to talk to us about the lack of lighting and their safety concerns around waiting for buses. Here's the perfect opportunity to do something about that as well. So I don't think we can be holding out hope of $1 million handout from NZTA for a new bus terminal anytime soon. I think, as the officer said, it's been a 20-year discussion and, you know, that's not coming. So here's an option that we can give people somewhere warm, dry, safer to wait. And let's not be put off from it by the fear, which may not even be justified, that somehow it's going to attract antisocial behaviour. So I would strongly urge that you support this going to the annual budget debate, and that when it gets there that you also vote for it, because it's a cost-effective, cost-sharing mechanism of providing good facility for people to use public transport. And if the last couple of weeks haven't been enough to persuade people that public transport is a good thing, then I think the coming few weeks will certainly do that.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very supportive of it because I believe it's well needed within the city. But I am concerned about two or three things. One is I think the budget's very light. I think the budget's just looked at as a real plane first up. A lot of other costs such as repairs and maintenance, where's that coming from? You say security will rely on the police or Horizons, but I think security is going to be something that in a year's time, someone's going to come back to council and say we need funding for security. That you can almost guarantee that will happen. So we need to look at security right from the start and let the unwanted or the undesirable people know that there is security there right from the start. Because if it's not, they will move in. I can assure you of that. It's going to be warm, it's going to be dry, it's going to be very, very accommodating. So I would like to see a realistic budget, to be perfectly honest. Something that we can look at and see all the costs accounted for. Will I vote for it? I'm of two minds at this stage. But really, we do need it. But let's know the honest and the true costs, what it's going to cost us, not just what we hope it's going to cost us.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for the discussion. It's an interesting paper in front of us today because on first glance, there are some quite good benefits to it, and I'm certainly not entirely opposed to the provision of a co-funded bus terminal lounge. However, the discussion that we've had over questions has left me, frankly, with more questions than answers in terms of how this is going to work. So there's 5 things I would like more information on. One is, what is the term of the lease? Because if we're standing here saying, and I'm taking the Mayor's assurance 3 years, but Horizons is thinking 5 years, and Transit's thinking 2 years, and NZTA is thinking 1, that is not a stable environment to make a decision on for how it's going to work. I see councillors shaking their head, but that is the truth. If there's no term in this paper, any other time we're asked to approve a lease in this chamber, it comes to us with a term. That is just normal practice. And so I find it very odd to say we haven't even had that discussion with Safari as to how long it might be. Safari might only be interested if we agree to a 10-year lease term. We don't know. We have no idea. So I think that is not enough information on that. I've got questions around how it will operate. Is there or isn't there going to be a coffee shop? What are the times it's open? What are the security concerns? Are Horizons keeping the security or getting rid of them? What's that going to look like? I am not impressed with the argument that, people can just come make submissions as part of the annual budget about this. This isn't in the annual budget. The annual budget's already gone out for consultation. This needs a specific piece of stakeholder engagement with not only the businesses, but the users of the bus and the wider community. And I'm not appeased by the argument of, oh, well, we could just send a few emails out and they could make a submission to the annual budget. That is not enough of a stakeholder engagement, in my opinion. I am not satisfied with the answer of, we've done a piece of work you haven't seen that tells us the bus terminal will have to remain where it is. I'm a bit baffled as to this idea that we've got to spend tens of millions of dollars on a new terminal in the inner city. You could literally just take the car parks out, put bus stops in, and add some signs up and have it in there tomorrow. We don't have to build a $20 million new facility in the square. We've got concreted space that we could use. We've just concreted all the space around the clock tower that we could use for the events to quell that concern of the mayor's. So I don't see why we couldn't at least have that information so that we know. Because if we're looking at spending $200,000 on fitting out a place, the council then decides in 2 years' time we'd like to move the terminal to the square, that's not a good use of money. And the fifth one is along Councillor Finlay's lines of the budget options. I am quite confident that in a year's time we will get a request cap in hand, oh, council would really like some security here or some CCTV cameras because it's been more of an issue than we thought it would be. Of course Safari are happy with it. It's a $690 to $700 per square metre rate. I called a commercial agent yesterday and said, what would that be? And they said that would be a record in the city for how much we'd pay for per square metre. Even down the road, the highest that I've seen on lease available at the moment is 650 square metre. It's an outrageous amount of money, so of course they're happy with it. We're paying for their fit out. We're getting an empty shell and doing the work in it. So of course they're happy with it. I'd be happy with it if I were them as well. So I'm going to test the room today. I could just vote no and say, oh, well, there's not enough information. I'm going to vote no and scuttle the whole thing. I would rather, we've got time, councillors. The annual budget's already going out for consultation. We've still got a few months until the annual budget decisions, so we don't have to make this decision today. We could give it a month, do some basic stakeholder engagement, have a discussion with our partners on the term of the lease, and actually come to council with some good information that councillors can be confident in making a decision of. So under our standing orders, I'd like to move a procedural motion 2.14.1e to lie it on the table to be brought back to council prior to the annual budget deliberations with more information on the areas that I've outlined in my speech, and I believe Councillor Harper is happy to second that.
Look, under standing orders, I don't actually have to accept that because there hasn't been two that have spoken against it. But we've got 27 items on the agenda here, people. I don't want to play games with everybody. We're either going to succeed on this or we're going to vote it down. If we continue and somebody else speaks against it, then we can put it back up. So I'm in two minds just to get this out of the way. or we continue.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What you're referring to is a standing order in regard to a closure motion. That would be 2.14.1c. I move the procedural motion 2.14.1e, which is the motion for it to be laid on the table. So therefore, standing order 2.14.2 that you're referring to doesn't apply.
I'll just get the officers to speak to it because there's differences of opinion. But I'm of the, it actually is ridiculous. So I'm almost of the opinion we'll just put it up and just let the room decide.
That doesn't apply.
Yeah, that's fine.
Further information required.
I'll put it up and we're going to have a vote to lie it on the table under the procedural motion and until further information. So no more discussion on this, we have to vote on that. So we'll get that up on, that's on screen there. That's moved by Councillor Wood, seconded, does it have a seconder? Councillor Harpiter, okay. All right, and we'll put that to the vote, please. You either agree with it or you don't. And that has failed, 6 votes for and 10 against. All right, we move along. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I'd just really like to thank officers for what I think is a really good report. I think this provides an amazing opportunity where we have partners who have already made their commitment ahead of time. And in particular, I appreciated the officers including in Table 1 the full financials, including debt repayment. And I know I've been one to identify that as being needed to be included, so I appreciate that that has been included in the financials in this report. I do not recall a time in many, many years where $23,000 annually would achieve something as good as what is proposed in this paper. This is really good value for money in my view. The concerns that have been raised about details about what hours things are open or what the lease years are, etc., we've got time to pin all this down. This is not set in concrete. This is referring a budget to the annual budget process. So we do have a bit of time to pin that down, and I'm comfortable with that. But based on the information in front of me, we definitely need to say a big yes to this. Of course, when it comes to the annual budget, I'll be looking for at least $23,000, if not more, in savings in other areas. You all know that. But for what this report offers, I think, as the Mayor said, it's a no-brainer. We absolutely need to take this opportunity. Taking out lines in a car park does not provide shelter from rain and cold. I've experienced sitting in some of the other facilities around the country, and it's very, makes the whole process of using public transport much more appealing if you know there's somewhere that you can go and sit and wait for the next trip. So absolute yes from me.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Colleagues, firstly, just a, I guess, a comment around process, given that that seems to have been some of the debate so far. I find it quite extraordinary when we have the perfect opportunity. We're already open for submissions, consulting with the community, having active engagement with bid, with the tenant, with the developer, and all the rest that we would think that's the perfect time to shut it down. It just seems very, very odd to me. It seems odd when we've had NZTA and Horizons put their money on the table to try to shut it down. It just honestly seems like a bizarre kind of approach. The reality is that the case here is very strong to have a proper space for people to wait while they're waiting for their bus to arrive. The urban bus network is in fact growing very rapidly, has a strong user base, and that's really thanks to Horizons and NZTA substantially investing to get the improved service, to get the diesel fumes out of the square, because that was a major driver of the concerns around the buses being in the square and in the city centre in the first place. That service is going very well, but it does need the basics met, and this is certainly just the basics, but it is a good step in the right direction. I think there's some real opportunities here in terms of getting secure off-street, especially e-bike parking. So it'd be really good to see that addressed in the fit-out options that come. The simple reality is, colleagues, the current space is absolutely unfit. It has less shelter than a wintering barn for dairy cows. Yes. And I say that as an agricultural scientist who spends some time in wintering barns for dairy cows. It is a shame what we have there, and it does need to be fixed, and this is a simple way to do it. So I'd encourage colleagues to see the value in this. Not only does the rain come in when it's blowing a bit, it actually turns out that it's got this kind of gull wing design, and that the gutters are very conveniently located exactly over the seats. And so when it properly rains, you get the rain right onto the seats currently. As a user, you would know that. It's very, very poor service, and this is just an absolute bargain that we should be moving forward with. I think it is timely that we do take it through a consultative process and hear from the community, because there are obviously some challenges that do need resolved in terms of its operations, and be good to hear community views on that. But I'd very much encourage the room to support this through to the budget for feedback from the community in the interim and debate in a few months' time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would like to support, to speak in favour of the recommendations before us. And I share the comments that have been made earlier by councillors who have spoken in favour of this. I think the reason why I'm actually supporting this is simply because I believe that it will enhance terminals, the terminal and our public transport network. And also, while I understand some of the concerns that have been raised earlier about the bid, I do believe, or I have confidence in staff that they will come up with good, high-quality design and activation to mitigate some of the risks that have been actually highlighted earlier on by the bid. And this is not anything new. I mean, I've been in other places where I've used the bus system, Hamilton, Nelson, Christchurch, and they've got bus lounges in the middle of the city. So having bus lounges in a high-profile area is not anything new in New Zealand. A lot of regional cities of our size do actually have bus lounges in the middle of the city or in high-profile areas that enable bus drivers to actually wait in there. And I'm someone who uses the bus quite a lot as well. I use 104, Parnell Heights, and I usually, at 6:01, that's when my bus leaves from here, from the CBD to Parnell. And I also use the 9:01 when I have football training in the evening, for example. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is simply because you have to only be a bus user to understand some of the issues that are happening there. When it's raining, it's not a good and suitable environment to sort of wait for a bus. When it's cold during the winter, it's not a suitable place to wait for a bus. You have to be a user to appreciate some of the issues that patrons encounter whilst waiting for bus. The third reason why I'm also supporting this is largely because it's a cost-effective way of doing this. It's no brainer. The first time when I got elected on this council, one of the meetings that we had was, we talked about millions of dollars to build the infrastructure for a new bus shelter or lounge. And what we're currently investing And this is not, it's just a drop in the bucket for us. And we have partners who are willing to put in the money. And it's no brainer. So I think it's a cost-effective way of doing this. And also, to come back to the issue of addressing homelessness, I read that the government has indicated strong desire to actually introduce move-on orders through the amendment of the Summary Offences Act. So if that was to arise, of course the police is currently, or as it's being proposed, will be given powers to actually move people on if there was some sort of antisocial behaviors happening around the area. So for me personally, it's a no-brainer, and I think we should do this, and I'm going to encourage my colleagues to also move in that direction. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for the interesting comments on all of this. I wanted to comment on the suggestion that this is quite a straightforward thing to solve in a different way. It's been one of my roles on council over some of the last 12 years to be part of the city centre indicative business case work, which is a piece of work that we have been undertaking with stakeholders and elected members for at least the last 6 years to have exactly these conversations. Stakeholders including the BID, who've been an active part of that, the Chamber of Commerce, but also our youth council, our student community, our wider disability community, for example, are all involved in those conversations. There have been long discussions about how we might support our non-car using community to access the central city and also to transit through it using public transport. If this was straightforward, we'd have solved it long before now. We've been going round in circles with location, with money, with issues for at least the last 12 years. And as Councillor Johnson said, people have been out in the cold all of that time. My worry with this conversation is the car-centric approach we bring to our planning dehumanises people who don't drive cars. We make their needs less important than the need for parking, for example. That's a concern to me in this. I'm encouraged by what we hear from Horizons about the increase in usage of our buses. There's also been a significant change in how our public transport and school transport is being used. So to use a quote in this stage, I think this is a useful time to focus our conversation on this because winter is coming. And we've all talked today about the particular weather issues that I'm sure are not specific to Palmerston North, but maybe are particularly exacerbated by the current location of the Main Street terminal and the coverage that's available there. And at the moment, we have a huge number of school children who are hubbing through Main Street because they're no longer hubbing through North Street. Now, North Street had no cover at all, so I'm not suggesting that was a better option. But we are now bringing together lots of our travelling public, especially school children, through that location. And it's not comfortable, it's not pleasant, and it's not particularly safe for school children, particularly. And if we can do anything to address those issues, then that's a good thing. I think people have talked about this being good value, and I would agree. I'm particularly pleased to see the partnership in this proposal between Horizons, the good guys, as they're regularly referred to as, partners at NZTA, where we know this has been a long and complicated discussion with NZTA about what we're going to do with our bus services. So I'm glad to see their support here, and Transit as well coming to this conversation. I think this is really good value for money. It addresses a very real issue in our community and enables us to do something rather than continuing the conversation for another decade. So I'm certainly in support.
Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with lots of the points made, so I won't repeat them, but I did just want to add another point based on some of the commentary that we heard earlier. And I will always remember during our LTP hearings, a particular submitter who came to us wanted us to provide less public seating in the suburbs because near his house, a homeless person would sleep on a bench and it made his wife feel really uncomfortable to look at when they took their morning walk. He was so moved to submit to us to provide less for our whole community in order to deter the homeless community from being visible because of the discomfort that that made him feel. The idea that we should not provide this service or facility for the wider community because homeless people might use it too, and that would be a disaster, is so disappointing. And I would encourage a wider boundary lens on that line of thinking. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you. I don't think any of us don't want a terminal. I think we all want a terminal. I think where some of us were looking at it was to put a pause on it so that we could actually go back and talk to some people that had concerns over it. That's all that was asked. Nothing more than that. We all want to have the terminal. We all want to have the funders in that same discussion. That isn't where some of us were coming from. It was just to take a breath and go back and talk to some of our other partners that hadn't actually finished that discussion. And that's all I wanted to say, is that, not that we disagree with the terminal. I've been around the table the same amount of years, which is 13, and had these same discussions as everybody else. But it's more that it's just to take that breath and talk to these people in the bid because they are concerned. Thanks.
I was hoping we we're going to get through, but you'll keep popping in. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Sir. Just quickly, just like my colleague beside me, my main concern is in the report it says co-funding assumptions, and how can I be asked to make a decision on assumptions? So, yeah, I would have preferred this to have been paused, for more questions to have been asked, and for more answers to be given. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Again, just quickly, I won't be supporting this either, but just a clarification point, as someone who has actually owned cattle in this country, they do actually, Councillor Barrett, live outside year-round in New Zealand because of our temperate climate. So just a clarification point there in case anyone was thinking cows live inside, because they do not. Thank you.
All right, no more. Okay, so colleagues, all we're trying to do here is refer this to the annual budget. So for those that want to have a pause and think about it and double think about it and triple think about it, that's all we're doing. The assumptions are well thought out. You know, there is OPEX in there is fit out costs, but you have teased some stuff through which I'm sure the officers will come back with more information. Look, every modern city has a decent bus service with facilities. You know, it's been said so many times around the room. The connection of the homeless people to all of this is a strange, really strange mix. So yes, we do have some problems, like every city. But to connect it all to the buses and this lounge is to me a long bow. Look, Horizons and our partners at the Transport Agency have provided some assurance that they're going to be a partner. This is a good deal, people. And look, you know, to be really fair, the bid board, and I say board because I'm a member of the bid with some commercial property I own, some of us have differing views. And I know I've spoken to a couple of other members. Look, some people don't like it where it is at the moment, and they own property around it. So let's put it on the table. So we've got a major partner that's come to town and actually has a little bit more knowledge of what happens in New Zealand and the world, and they're very happy to invest multi-millions of dollars right next to a bus terminal. They can see the improvement that can be made. But look, all we're doing, colleagues, is referring this to the annual budget. Then we'll get more answers for some of the questions that you've asked. So look, please try and be part of the solution than just pulling it down. This is one of the better public-private options that's been put in front of us that I can recall for the last decade. The cost to the council is minimal. The uplift in what we're trying to do, which will improve the potential antisocial behaviour, is massive. So try and be part of the solution, please. We will vote. Thanks. And that has passed 10 votes for, 5 against, and 1 abstention. All right. I might, we've got 2 really big ones coming through. We might just have a quick break now, people. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to now. Yeah. Yeah. Kia ora. Welcome back, everybody. And we're moving through to number 8. And look, colleagues, we have got a lot to get through. We're not even a quarter of the way through, and there's a lot to go. So I'll be doing 3 for, 3 against from now, so just a bit of a heads up. So we're now talking around the implication of Nature Calls project, and I'll invite Mike Monaghan and Anna Lewis up, please. And do you have somebody online? Francis? Is Francis on? Thank you, Francis, from Stantec. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monaghan te Wingwe. Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to present to you this morning. We do have a PowerPoint to run through, and I acknowledge that there's quite a lot of information in there. We shared with you last night, so our intention is just to pick out some of the highlights from the PowerPoint as we go through, and not to linger too long on it. Just as a refresher, Council, you'll remember the background to the project. The midpoint review of the current consent was reviewed, and a decision was made to have a new consent, ready for submission by November 2021. A few things happened along the way. We had a consent in with Horizons by 22, and then we was going through the section 88 and the section 92 request for further information when we came across the question of whether the option was affordable at the last LTP, and the rest you're all very familiar with. Back in May, we had a session just like this, asking the same questions about which options we would continue to work on and which options we would discard and for what reasons. And that's the same question we're asking today. And you can see on the slide there, they're the options that we decided, or that you'd rather decided to keep working on last time. Now, in an attempt to make things simpler, I may have inadvertently made it more confusing. So B1 and B2 was an option last time around a single discharge at the Tota Road site. When we looked at our options and we was doing more investigation work, we realised that B1 and B2 as a consenting option was just option B really, and the difference being the adaptive management was applied to one of those options, and we call that B2. So for comparing it against the standards and the project objectives, we've referred in this paper to option B. So we've got option A, B, C and E for you to consider. One of the things that we have looked at is whether or not adaptive management could or should be applied to any options that you take forward rather than just at option B. As you will be familiar with, adaptive management is another way of saying continuous improvement. How do we make sure that we keep an eye on this for the length of the consent? How do we do things that continue to bring value in this space? I think Anna's going to talk a little bit now about the history of our adaptive management and what it actually means going forward. So I'll hand over to Anna.
Thanks, Mike. Just to remind us that adaptive management was actually a council-directed approach that came through in 2021 as a resolution that was passed with a previous BPO process. And as Mike just said, it's to continually reduce effects to the river by exploring alternative ways to divert wastewater from the river environment. And that was for the period of the consent at the time of 35 years. With the previous consent application, we developed an adaptive management strategy. This was drafted in collaboration with Rangatani at the time and outlined an approach that would be used to continually reduce wastewater or the effects going into the river. As Mike just outlined, B2 previously came to council, included adaptive management, and we're now looking to recommend that this approach is applied to all of the discharge options so that the benefits are applicable to all of them. If we do decide to apply adaptive management to all the options, the ask is that this is included in any public engagement material so that iwi, our stakeholders and the community can understand how this would apply to the project. So this is just a recap. These are the options that we were asked to continue doing work on, and as Mike's just outlined, B is the same option, which is the discharge to Totara Road. And this table on the screen now presents the traffic light against the three criteria that we have been looking at the options for. So cost, in line with the LTP budget of 480 million, not including inflation, the wastewater standards, the WEPs, and also the project objectives. And as what Mike was just saying, we've outlined there that adaptive management, which was B2 previously, has been included with B, and the question today is whether or not that's an option to use with all of the A, B, C, and E. I won't go through the project objectives, but just a reminder that these were developed by council, and this has been used in the previous BPO process. We have applied these as one of the criteria that we're looking at. And just to outline that we haven't included options 4, 5, and 11. I won't go into that here, but the paper outlines why we haven't assessed those. Just to let you know that we have not assessed against one additional option, which is number 4. We did have feedback from iwi that it wasn't appropriate for us to consider the health and mauri of the river without their input into that. Implications of the WEPs. We've come to council several times and talked about draft WEPs, and there was an update provided in February about the final WEPs and what the implications of that are on the project. But just to summarise that, the WEPs are providing an end of pipe standard, and there's several parameters that we need to meet, and that's based on the dilution of the river at the time. So our project team has gone through and looked at that and provided those assessments. Again, more details in the paper. Regional councils will be obligated to assess against the WEPs in terms of those treatment levels. And I just want to clarify that the WEPs, when I talk about end-of-pipe standards, do not provide any standards for cultural effects or other non-WEPs matters. And those are things like emerging contaminants. Just skip to the... Pass over to Mike for cost.
Thanks, Anna. So, Councillor, you'll be very aware at this stage of the project that the cost assumptions are based on relatively high-level estimates using base cost components that were developed back around the 2024 time. There's an attachment in the paper that talks about how we come up with cost estimates at various stages of the project. And that we'll be going into a lot more detail as we take options forward. And when we come back to you for a final BPO decision, we have a lot more detail around the costing at that stage. But the costing that we're presenting today is high level and can be used confidently for a comparator against the options. We'll be employing a QS to come back and do some very more firm estimates on our next presentation. We'll race through these slides relatively quickly. These are the quick description of the options and how they stack up against the three measures of cost, standards and on objectives. Option A, you'll recall, is an upgrade to the treatment plant at Totara Road to meet the new standards, and then a conveyance methodology to take that wastewater and discharge it somewhere around the Opiki area. And the reasons you will recall for that was the uncertainty around the periphyton impact. And the river at Opiki is a sandy bottomed river rather than a stony gravel rocky bottomed river that it is here in town. Option B is the one that we're all familiar with. That's an upgrade to the treatment plant. To meet the new WEPs, typically something like a membrane bioreactor or a similar technology to get that really high level activated sludge process going, and that will get the nutrient levels down to meet the WEPs, and that would be discharging at the Totara Road site. The second one there is the one with the asterisks, and that's just to say that we haven't applied adaptive management costing yet for these options if you decide to go ahead with adaptive management. Option C was a dual discharge to the river. That was a site at Opiki for when the river is in really low flow conditions, and a discharge site at Totara Road when the river flow is somewhat higher. And the offset there is around the OPEX costing. You know, is it going to be more cost effective to to have a lower alum dosing situation for phosphorus removal, but higher pumping costs, or the other way around. And that's some work that we still need to do if this option goes forward from today. Noting that we do still need the full upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant for this option. Option E was by far the most complex of the options on the table. And you'll see there's a few challenges with option E, namely a budget challenge there. We've got a plus substantial other costs, and the reason for that is we haven't done any further work yet to understand the conveyance costs and the infrastructure costs if we do go ahead and have to consider the size of lands that would be required for this option. You'll see the third bullet point down, the way the WEPs interact between land and river discharge. We would be talking about a partial upgrade only to the treatment plant. That nitrogen limit we'd need to achieve would be 15 milligrams per litre rather than the 4 milligrams per litre for the full upgrade. So this would be a partial upgrade to the treatment plant, but a much larger land area would be required because we wouldn't be able to discharge at all into the river during the low flow months. It would 100% would need to go to land during the low flow periods. So this becomes very challenging to find that amount of land to purchase and to do the testing to be able to do a risk assessment, which is required by the WEPs. This is a final table which reflects the table that you saw earlier. The difference this time is that we've just put the costs for the project to date, the high level cost for the project to date, so you can see that as a comparison. Noting that adaptive management costs, again, are not included in those costs.
Just to recap, we're looking at to ask for public feedback on the project from April to May this year. And the purpose of this is to seek feedback on the revised list of wastewater discharge options. There's some collateral that has been drafted at the moment, including information on the project, regulatory requirements, funding, and talks about the Central District's water establishment as well. Proposing to have public drop-in sessions held in various areas, including Foxton, Shannon and Palmerston North. And all feedback will be summarised and will feed into the BPO decision-making process. Just to sort of, last year we had lots of reform with the WEPs. This year we're looking at reform with the Resource Management Act. Many of you will be aware of this, but the new bill has been introduced already, and the one that's applicable to this project is the Natural Environment Act. It will be the main piece of legislation looking at for wastewater consenting. Because the WEPs now applies to new discharges, and depending on the final BPO outcome, a new consent application may be required. If that's the case, we would need to withdraw the consent that's currently lodged with Horizons. It really does depend on what the final discharge option is. The current bill is having submissions heard at the moment, so we're not entirely sure of what the final dates will be for that. We do know that the government's looking at getting this through as quickly as possible. The NEA may offer benefits, such as simplified consenting and reduced assessment burden, but we still need to wait for the select committee process to be finalised. And just a summary of what we anticipate the forward programme to be from here. Today we have the council meeting, which we're looking at the determination for which options continue forward to be developed. April to July, further iwi engagement, public engagement, as I said, further development of the technical options, those on the discharge options that continue forward. July, we'll be looking at a council paper for option selection, and at the moment we've got Q3, Q4 for a final BPO decision.
Thank you, councillors. We're happy to take the substantive paper as read and open it up through you, Mr. Mayor, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask one first before I go to my colleagues? Adaptive management, could you give me some examples of staged adaptive management that could occur here?
Yes. So there's two ways, well, there's probably three ways to look at adaptive management. One is on reducing the inputs to the wastewater treatment plant. One that we've talked about quite a lot is having an inflow and infiltration review to see if we can reduce the impact of stormwater into the plant. It could be that we look at whether water metering as a demand management tool could reduce inputs to the treatment plant, and working with our trade waste partners around the city to lower the impacts on the input to the plant. At the other end of the plant, it would be doing things like maximising the reuse of the final water, and a good example would be any process water for the new plant, if that's the direction of council. We would look to utilise treated resource water, as we like to call it, for all the process water on the plant. So that would be one idea. It could be that we look for future resource uses of that water. You know, as they
So farmland, golf courses, race courses.
Yeah, exactly. So reducing the inputs to the plant and reducing the inputs to the river. And, you know, iwi will work with us as well and give us ideas around, you know, how do we improve the moray of the river by doing other projects that are related to adaptive management as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mike. And just building on the Mayor's question, so within an adaptive management strategy, what would be the sort of mechanisms that would be in place to activate some of these options?
Well, I think the first thing would be to have an agreed framework with council and with iwi, and then there would need to be a funding mechanism to agree on any milestones or future I guess projects that fit within the adaptive management framework.
Great, thank you. Given that your verbal advice to us today was that adaptive management strategy should be considered for all options that go forward from today, can I understand why it wasn't in the officer's recommendation on the paper?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and we sort of looked back at the last resolution, and I don't have it to hand, but back in 2021, there's still an active standing resolution for adaptive management to be applied to the BPO. The fact that we're stepping back from the current lodge consent means we don't yet have a BPO, so there's already a resolution of council to apply adaptive management to the BPO.
So then it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, your advice is that we don't need to attach it to any option because by default it's already attached to every option?
At the moment, by default it's attached to the option, but if you didn't wish to have adaptive management, you could make a resolution
to remove it
yeah,
from any of the ABC, et cetera. Okay, cool. That's really helpful to understand. And your comments around mechanism, et cetera, within those would stand regardless then, and as long as the AMS actually is kept.
Yeah, if I understand the question, the options going forward will lead us to a BPO decision, and the final BPO decision, depending on council deciding, we'll either have an adaptive management strategy attached to the final BPO, or you'll have to remove that.
Okay, cool, thanks. Moving on, just briefly, could you help us understand why we don't have a viable hybrid option in front of us today, given that we're a number of years and dollars into this exercise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my response to that would be the hybrid option is the option that was already submitted to Horizons for hybrid land and river option, which was deemed as unaffordable. We looked for a different mechanism. When council made the decision back in August last year to go forward with 4 or 5 options, the driver at that stage was to use soil moisture as a way of maximising diverting to land, But that was before the final standards were applied, councillor, and with the final standards, it's made that option very difficult to achieve. So both cost and standards has led us to review option E, which is our only hybrid option on the table at the moment. I do note that adaptive management could be utilised to get us to a hybrid option eventually, if that was the direction of council. But again, that would need funding.
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose that kind of loops me back around to the earlier questions then, because you're talking about if it's the direction of council. So you've said that there is adaptive management already by default in there. So are you saying then that we need further definition within adaptive management of what of those components that you talked to the mayor about in terms of less inputs, I&I, water meters, reuse, farmland, et cetera? Are you saying that we would have to explicitly direct something to achieve any kind of hybrid investigation in the future?
Just on the adaptive management strategy that was prepared with the last consent.
Yeah.
If you remember, we were under a very tight deadline to submit that consent application at the time, and the resolution was passed in September 2021, and our application initially was due, I think, mid-2022. However, with COVID, that was extended out until the end of 2022. The AMS strategy that was developed, and Frances is online if she wants to assist to answer this, but that strategy was allowing for us to have a mechanism to generate ideas about how we could look for alternative discharges. However, at that time, for us to be able to bake those alternatives into the consent application, we just didn't have the time to get that done, particularly when you're starting to look at things like discharges to golf courses or other alternative solutions. Our consent application would have had to have covered the breadth of that. What we applied for was the BPO as it was currently formed at that time in the consent application, and the AMS allowed us to continue to work and incentivised that team and that governance team to come up with alternative ideas.
Thanks. So how much work would happen between today and Q3, Q4 2026 to better define the AMS so that next time we're having this conversation, there's something more tangible in front of us?
That's probably a discussion I think we'd need to have with the project team, but also with our iwi partners, because I think this is something that would be useful to discuss with them. We certainly had, the AMS had ideas and submitted a table of potential options that we could look at. I mean, that's certainly still available to us, so we could relook at that.
Great, thank you. And finally, Mr. Mayor, for now at least, I was interested in the recommendations, and that there's the options, and then there's a for the following reasons. And I wondered, I guess, why the second half of that recommendation set is there, because it's, in my kind of world, it would seem that if we say we're doing option whatever for this reason, that kind of gives a potentially quite narrow basis and therefore scope for legal challenge. Whereas if we just simply said we're doing these options, wouldn't that be a stronger position for us to be in rather than trying to justify it through the recommendation?
Yes. We, from a RMA perspective, or I appreciate we're going to have a new NEA or whatever the bill is we end up with, we've had a lot of discussions with the project team and our advisors about the need to still go through an option selection process. So last year we brought forward a traffic light against those three criteria. The idea today is to get a decision in terms of which options you'd like us to take forward further. Yep. However, we still need to go through an option selection process that looks at more detail about these options. Multi-criteria assessment is a method that is regularly used for major infrastructure, and we still need to do that process following today's outcome.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Isabella.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I had a few questions for you. They're a bit sort of all over the place, but the first one is about the periphyton risk assessment. Is that a one-off for classification purposes, or is that something that's needs to be ongoing for that site of discharge?
Yeah, so the perifighting risk assessment is a one-off piece of work to get a classification for our discharge, and the outcome of that will be a low risk, medium risk, high risk, very high risk. That feeds into the WEPS matrix, if you like, to say what level of treatment you need to achieve to be able to get a consent for that discharge. So it is a one-off, at this stage, a one-off piece of work. There may be follow-on work needed for proving that you're achieving your conditions, but for this piece of work, it's a one-off piece of work, Councillor.
Thank you. Is there an outcome where the risk is a high risk that the Total Road only option would be excluded, or would that be something that is just mitigated through treatment levels?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and that's where most of our focus has been, is to ensure that we can, even if we had a very high risk for the periphyton risk assessment, the capabilities of the treatments that we're proposing will still meet those. It will be, it will be significantly. So I say significantly, it will be very, very highly treated wastewater, but the new plants that we're considering or proposing would achieve those.
Okay, thank you. So if we looked at a hybrid, a dual discharge at Total Road and then Opiki, is that sort of a risk mitigation depending on flows, so that you have both of those options available to you in different conditions?
Yeah, and I just remind Council that these options were developed before the WEPs were finalised.
Yes.
When we didn't understand that the periphyton risk assessment would feed into a matrix, we were looking at a national bottom line at the beginning of this process, and there was a risk that discharging to Total Road during low river flows wouldn't be achievable. That risk has now been removed, and we know that we can do that. So now it's just a comparative between what's more cost effective to put some capital work into piping down there versus the extra alum dosing for OPEX. And if option C remains after today, that's some of the work we'll do going forward.
Excellent, thank you. I just had a question about the Natural Environment Bill as it stands at the moment, progressing through the legislative process. The environmental limits, which aren't yet available, and the resource allocations. I wondered, do we yet have a sense of hierarchy between the WEPs and the environmental limits, and which would have precedence if they were at odds?
I'm going to ask Frances if she can answer this one.
I think unhelpfully the answer is probably no. If we take the learnings from what's happened in the last year and the precedence that the WEPs has had over everything up until now, I would anticipate that if there's a disagreement, the WEPs will prevail, but we have no information to support my anticipation.
Thank you, that's helpful. Because the WEPs look at end-of-pipe standards, could we reasonably assume that limits might look at cumulative effects on receiving environments, and might that have a bearing on where we discharge to?
Frances, would you like that one as well?
I can try. I think it would be reasonable to assume that the environmental limits would be looking to take care of cumulative effects. The difficulty, I think, is that the WEPs at the moment are very much set up that councils cannot grant consents within stream limits that would then mean that the end of pipe limits were worked around, essentially. So I think that's a particularly fine detail that the government will need to be working through this year to try and work out how the various pieces of things that they're doing fit together.
Okay, thank you. I just had a couple of others. One was, I was at the Freshwater National Conference yesterday, and the DIA presenter there signalled that there would be a second tranche of WEPs that are working through the legislative process now that might possibly require increased standardisation and possibly incorporate discharge to air, among other things. And when I asked them to elaborate, they said they couldn't. And I just wondered, are you in a position to give us any more information about what other standards we might be lumped with?
What I can confirm, Councillor, is that I've heard the same as you, and that is that there is a second tranche of WEPs starting to be worked on now. And what I've heard from Taumata Arawai is that they do include discharge to air, and they will include heavy metal discharge. And that's as much information as been divulged to me at this stage.
Do we think that is to streamline the regulators so that we might be dealing with 2 regulators rather than 3?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Cool, fair enough. And they also talked yesterday about further guidance coming regarding discharge to land and discharge to water from DIA that's due in late March, which I guess is kind of now. Had you heard anything about the further guidance that we might get?
No, I've not heard anything about that.
Cool. Another question just in relation to the plant and upgrades or new builds that we might need to do, and national engineering design standards, and whether or not that is operative as mandatory, and whether the standardised designs for easier consenting will apply to us.
So the National Engineering Design Standards will be mainly focused on the horizontal build, the pipes, the pump stations, connections to the networks. They're unlikely to apply to a significant capital project like a vertical build, such as the wastewater treatment plant. They may go as far as standardising small treatment plants. That was hinted at in the Act, that there would be a standardisation for population equivalent of less than 1,000 people. I haven't heard if that's progressing, but I don't imagine they'll apply to a big bespoke build like what we're proposing.
Thank you. Last one is about adaptive management strategy, and the one that we've already developed and lodged with the previous application. And are we in a position to use that work that's already been done? Is it transferable?
I think we're in a position to build on the work that's already been done. We do have further meetings with our iwi partners in the next few days planned to start those discussions.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
I've only got 2 questions, you'll be pleased to hear. The first one is, are we planning to include options for adaptive management in the consultation material?
That would be the intention, Councillor, if that was the will of the Council.
Okay. And then the second one is, how is the work that we're doing now going to be, how are we going to ensure, or can we even, how we hand it over to Central District's Water? What's the kind of meshing between us and the decisions we're making now and the decisions that they'll be making in 18 months' time? And is there any risk that they might want to redo some of it?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And thankfully I've got a gentleman sat behind me who might be interested in Mr. Dyberg up there. Central District's Water have been kept informed all across this whole project. It also has been well detailed in the Water Service Delivery Plan, which was agreed by the DIA, and the new board who will be coming on in April will be well briefed of nature calls as being one of their biggest projects. That's the detail I have at the moment to answer that question, Councillor.
But I mean, is there any risk that we're spending money now doing these investigations and public consultation, and then in 18 months' time, Central District's Water comes along and says, oh, we don't like, I don't know, say option A, we don't like option A that council has indicated as a preferred option, we want to go with, another option, and then work has to be done again?
Councillor, I think it's difficult for me to answer that question of what a future board might decide. Is there a risk?
I'll just get the CE to answer.
Yeah, through the chair, it's certainly been my intention to make sure that this council makes a decision on what the preferred option is for its community. You've got a vested interest in this over a long period of time. I think it's really important for us to get to a point where you have made a decision about the best practical option in relation to this, and then that moves forward. A lot of the decisions that you're making around here as well, including things around adaptive management plan, plans and strategies and things, I think will actually form part of SOE conversations and things like that you would be looking to provide It's about what's best for this particular community. So my plan is, and it's not to try and necessarily lock a board into a place where it can't make any other sort of decisions, but effectively in this one, the knowledge base around this project sits in this room, and I want to try and get this as far along as we can.
Okay, I just wanted to be reassured that we weren't doing work that was going to be done again and wasting people's time and money. No, okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. A couple of areas of question from me. Firstly, the consultation. In terms of the things that are still changing, such as the second tranche of WEPs and the RMA, etc., is there any risk that we could consult in that April to May period, but then, you know, some of those changes affect what we've consulted out on, and that be mean, you know, is there any risk of that being too soon in terms of some of those other legislative changes?
I don't believe so, Councillor. The heavy metal standards, you know, would just be a component of treatment that the new plant would deal to, and air discharge, we'd imagine we'd have to go for a consent for air discharge anyway, so it just becomes part of the process and it won't change the final decision making.
Okay, thanks. And in terms of the options that we consult on, if elected members want to state a preferred option but have perhaps another option to consult on, you talked in your presentation earlier about B1 and B2. I know that's not the way it's described in the paper. Is it possible for us to consult on B1 and B2 as two separate options, having the adaptive management as the difference, or do you think it needs to be one of the options as proposed in the paper?
I might take some advice from legal counsel on that one, please.
Yeah, look, I think you could actually just separate them out if that's what you want to be doing.
As in, you could consult on B1 and B2 as two options, with one of those being a preferred option. Okay, thank you. And in terms of the adaptive management costs, in 6.7 on page 41, it talks about the cost of adaptive management potentially being as much as 1 million per year, and that's with OPEX and CAPEX. Some of the examples you described in earlier, such as water meters, etc., wouldn't that be a lot more than $1 million?
Yeah, absolutely would be a lot more than $1 million. And I guess adaptive management doesn't have to sit within just this framework, because we're calling it continuous improvement. If there was a capital programme to do water metering across the whole city, one of the benefits of that would be it would feed into the adaptive management programme. So, you know, I don't think you'd need to build a programme for every project and call it adaptive management. It may be that some of those are captured anyway through some of the other capital projects that the council or Central District Water.
So is the $1 million more the identification of those projects or the decision making around those projects as opposed to the delivery of those projects, or the adaptive management methodology?
I think the $1 million a year, and Anna might correct me here, during the last process, a figure of $40 million for adaptive management over the length of the consent was what was discussed. I don't know if that was ever agreed upon by anybody, but that was the kind of value that they was looking at for, you know, doing projects that would restore or go somewhere towards restoring the Maori of the river. So that's just a kind of a placeholder that we've put in the paper to give you a feel for what we talked about last time, but you know, we can bring some more information back when you're making your decision.
Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you. While I've been sitting in this room over the years, you've talked quite a bit about low and slow flow at Totara Road. That's not mentioned at all in option B. Is that changed? What's changed?
If I understand the question, Councillor, I think what you're referring to is the category of dilution in the new standards. So the low level, the discharge at Total Road would fit into the low dilution category, which determines which standards you need to meet. And that's based on your, I think it's called a 7-day mouth. That's the medium annual low flow events in the river. The medium of those low flow events plus the ratio of the amount of wastewater that would be discharged during those low flow events gives you a category of whether you're a low dilution, medium or a high dilution environment. And I think that's what you're referring to. It's that low dilution category for the new standards.
Okay, thank you. You also talked in the past about historically there were PAR in that vicinity, and that was one reason why output there wasn't ideal. Is that still applicable, or?
We'll be working with our iwi partners around any of those cultural sites of significance. Yeah.
Okay, with the Manawatu River, how many other treatment plants apart from ours output into the Manawatu River? What other communities?
I don't have that information today, Councillor. I could find that for you, though.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mike. Okay, colleagues, we'll do 3 for and 3 against, and we have recommendations there around Council instructing the Chief Executive to continue to investigate following nature calls discharge options, and we see options A to E, and for the following reasons around compliance with the WEPS, which is the Wastewater Environmental Performance Standards, alignment with the project objectives, cost, and anything else that may come into it. 2, that we instruct this Chief Executive to discard following options, again A to E, and with following reasons: compliance of the WEPS, alignment with the project objectives, cost, or anything other. Colleagues, I've heard a lot, and we've all been around this. I think we need to put some surety into the program, but also to give or receive some public feedback on where we go next. So I'd like to put up this option, and I'll look for a seconder, that Council instructs the Chief Executive to discard option A from nature calls, discharge options for the following reasons of compliance around the WEPS, alignment with project objectives and cost. 2, that the Council instructs the Chief Executive to discard option E for nature calls options for the following reasons: again, compliance with WEPS, alignment with the project objectives and cost. 3, that Council instructs the Chief Executive to continue to investigate option B with the addition of a 1 million per annum adaptive management strategy and plan as a nature calls discharge option for the following reasons: compliance with the National Wastewater Environmental Performance Standards, alignment with the project objectives and cost. And number 4, that we still continue to investigate option C as well, with again the addition of the adaptive management strategy and plan as a nature calls option for the following reasons: again, compliance around WEPS, alignment with the project objectives and cost. So before I speak any further, is there a seconder that would be prepared to look at that? Thank you, Councillor Isabella. Look, colleagues, we've heard a lot around adaptive management, and thank you, Mike and Anna and everybody else that's put a lot of work into this. We need to go out for public feedback, and I say the word public feedback. We have consulted on this, and I have been here in this role, like many of you, for a long time, and I would like to see this go to some fruition and have some surety for our residents, but also for the future. Adaptive management has been spoken about at length, and it was good to hear some of the more high-level options, ultimately around making the plant go as well as it can, around the inputs that come into it and then the outputs. Improving our inflow to our stormwater network, which we're doing anyway, but we can speed some of that work up if we had an absolute strategy and plan around that. Water meters for fresh water, You know, there is real evidence to say that that works in other cities and other jurisdictions, so we should be looking to advance that. Also, working with trade waste customers. We're really advanced in this space, but we could do more, and that's around pre-treatment before the inflow comes into the plant. And we've done a good job, and I want to acknowledge the officers. I've been at the forefront of that with a lot of our more industrial and commercial customers, and it is seen now as a way of doing business. That doesn't happen everywhere else around New Zealand, and it will start to happen now. So our real tool here is the adaptive management, I believe. And look, there's further things that we could do around substantial riparian planting along the river, and a real enhancement of the wetlands at the treatment plant. We could even explore staging to reserves, to golf courses, irrigation, to race courses and golf courses, but also to nearby farmland as well. When we did this project a number of years ago, we had a number of farmers come to us and said, we'd be keen on that water. How can you get it to us? So, especially sand country, and we know the sand country pretty well starts at Rangiotu and goes through to the coast. So, look, I think there's opportunities there. Putting that $1 million, and it sort of got fed out in the questions too around what would we need to do that. But I think if we did this, it gives our public an understanding too of what that cost could be. If there was something a bit more substantial that came out of it, it would go to CD Waters to decide whether they did something a little bit more fuller in that. So I hope you can support this. It gives our public an opportunity to feedback around option B and option C, and we'll start to narrow it down to where we're going. So look for your support. Councillor Isabella.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to second this. Thanks for bearing with my long list of questions. I've been trying to determine to what extent we can actually shape our decision in what's an increasingly standardised and heavily prescribed arena, and it seems to me that actually the main determinant is whether or not we can cost effectively discharge at Totara Road given the risk to the receiving environment and what that might require of us, or whether we need a backup discharge point to cover all of our bases. It's pretty clear as we're moving through this process that further requirements are going to come into play, so I think that it's just trending towards less of a local process and more of a giving effect to the government direction type process. And I think that the continuous improvement adaptive management planning is the space where we get to keep our own objectives in play and not lose sight of what we set out to achieve when we commenced this journey all those years ago. I think that's important because the system is still being built and there is more information, there's more requirements to come. So having adaptive management built into our process better enables us to make progress, but also to be ready to respond to that change, to any curveballs that might come up or opportunities that might crop up, as the Mayor mentioned. So I understand that it's there by default, but by being explicit, I think we're being mindful that we are handing delivery of this project to Central District's Water in the nearest future, so refreshing the intention and the signal there is, I think, a very good idea. So I hope you'll support us going forward with these options. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Can I have a question before I speak, Mr. Mayor? Just on the rationale on one to discard option A, including cost, when we're going to include the option C and have it included because of cost when they're very similar amounts. Does that create a weak argument to discard the option A around cost? Can I get an interpretation from legal around that? With the question whether we should just take out cost of part of the rationale from recommendation one.
I'm comfortable with that if you think, I would seek some advice before. I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, you could obviously when you're considering the options, it's more weighted, removal of it, as I read it, is more weighted towards not quite meeting a sort of general alignment to the overall objectives rather than actually costs. So you could remove costs from there if you chose to do so, just to,
Are you
from
okay
that
with that?
perspective.
The seconder is, we'll just remove the word cost, so, yep.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, that was a concern just with the rationale being so close with the C option. Hey, like many of us actually have been around this, I was right from the early days when we did the mid-stage consenting review of the current plant, and it feels like we've gone a long walk on the long list and come back round to the same block we started at, to be honest. And back then we could have had a solution in the more moderate figures rather than the 290 now being proposed for that solution. So nevertheless, I think the other thing I was going to put a consideration on is whether we should have a preference of the two options. I don't know if that narrows our view around predetermination, but if I was going to give a weighting to the two options we go out for feedback on, would be for the B option, and I'd be comfortable with that if other colleagues were too, just to kind of give a steer in that proposition. But other than that, I think, yeah, needless to say, around all the steps in the process, I do agree with you. I think it should only be feedback and not a full consultation, because we've done this many times before. I feel out this is the better options around cost, because the costs were going through the roof with the land-based discharge options, and so you're not, you're quite right around the adaptive management around going to some discharge to the golf course or to some other wider land as options that we've never explored, although were floated years ago. We've never explored the possibility of that. So I'm very comfortable moving forward in this way. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, you do make a good point around the preferred option. If the seconder was fine, we add in around option B, around nature calls, as nature calls preferred discharge option. Yeah, thank you. Okay, is there anybody else that wants to speak against? Okay, all right, well, we're going to, I'm going to be strict around the 3-4 and 3 against. We've had 3-4. I'm not going to use my right of reply, so we will go to the vote, please. Can you put yourself back in? Councillor.
Sorry, I did indicate that I wanted to speak against one of the recommendations. Am I able to speak to that?
Yep, sure.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm really comfortable to support recommendations 1, 2 and 3, but I won't be supporting recommendations 4. My view is that based on the information that's been given to us, option 3 is not aligned with project objectives 6 and 10, and B is. And when I asked earlier in the questions whether we could actually consult on B1 and 2, the legal advice was that that was an option available to us. My preference, having got this far, I believe the community has well and truly given us feedback around cost, and whilst it's within the LTP limits, I'll acknowledge that, it's certainly not within the limits of what I believe is acceptable to our community based on the feedback to date. So I'm not in favour of including option C in one of the options that we consult. And if that is, I'd like to ask for that to be separated. If that doesn't progress, I would be more in favour of us consulting on option B1 and 2, and therefore highlighting the adaptive management issue as one to discuss through that consultation period. So just wanted to add that in. I'm definitely appreciate the inclusion of the option B being our preferred option. I think, has that been included? Yeah, so with that being our preferred option, I'm comfortable for that, but do believe at this point I would be I would prefer to exclude option C on the basis of the cost. So I'll be voting against recommendation 4 on that basis.
Okay, we're going to separate 4. I will use my right of reply now. Sorry, I didn't think I had to, but I will. Councillor, option C does complies with the WEPs in terms of compliance. Its alignment is in general alignment to the project objectives, and it is within the LTP budget. So I think although some members might have a slightly different view on what that is, it technically does. So we also got legal advice from Simpson Gresson late during the week that we should be putting some options on the table. So I think it'd be foolish to discount everything just because we want to get to a number. So I strongly advise you to vote for the entire lot, please. All right, we'll take 4 first, please. You can vote, please. And that is passed, 12 votes for and 4 against. Okay, we'll now come through to 1 to 3. And we'll vote on those, please. And that has passed, 16 votes for, none against. All right, we're through. Good. Just acknowledge the officers, big piece of work, thank you. Still going, but we're getting closer. Thank you. All right, colleagues, we'll go through to number 9, proposed amendments to the Signs and Public Places bylaw. And I'll invite Anne-Marie Maury and Peter Ridge up, please. Thank you. Is this show and tell? I hope you're going to put up one of the people's posters up, are you? All right, welcome Anne-Marie and Peter. Page 75 of your papers, councillors. Over to you.
Sorry about that. Kia ora koutou, Mayor and councillors. The purpose of today is to seek council's approval to consult on some proposed amendments to the Signs and Use of Public Places bylaw relating to election sign controls. So as you're aware, last month in February there was an elected member workshop, and that was largely in response to some issues that were experienced during the local body elections last year. And a hot topic of discussion was the use of digital and illuminated commercial billboards to display election advertising. Options to address these issues and others were presented at the workshop, with elected members providing a steer towards amending the bylaw as the most efficient and timely option ahead of the general election in November. I just wanted to note that the district plan and the Signs and Use of Public Places bylaw are the council's 2 regulatory tools that manage the effects of signage and the effects of signage on people and the environment. In terms of proceeding with an amendment to the bylaw, it is our advice that this is much more efficient than changing the district plan. And this is due to the plan stop directive by the government and a fair degree of uncertainty around whether an exemption to proceed with the plan change related to election signage would be approved. So, in summary, our best option really is to proceed with an amendment to the bylaw. Just noting though, around the district plan, it does provide the rules for digital and illuminated advertising signs. And we have sought some legal advice, which you will see outlined in our report, that neither regulatory tool trumps the other, which means that both need to be potentially complied with under the current controls. I think what's interesting to note is that the bylaw and the district plan do have very similar roles. They're trying to control activities that can impact on amenity values, such as excessive amounts of signage, which can cause safety concerns such as driver distraction or cause a nuisance to people. And these impacts are recognised in both the bylaw's purpose and the policies and objectives in the district plan. So we have worked at pace to try and present some amendments to the bylaw that respond to the issues and complaints that were encountered during the last local election, and we have carried out some further research and some engagement in the time available since the workshop. We were already reviewing the bylaw, as you're aware, so this has provided us with the opportunity to try and get better alignment with the legislation, the two acts that govern local and general elections, the electoral, in brackets, advertisements of a specified kind regulations, 2005, and also the district plan. In respect of some of the issues that arose, putting aside the key issue around the use of digital and illuminated commercial billboards, we have taken the opportunity to look at sign size limits, and particularly how Section 221B of the Electoral Act impacts on our setting of our local controls. And I'll get Peter to speak to that a little bit later on. Another thing that arose during the workshop and through, I suppose, an observation of other election controls that other councils have is that we don't have a defined clear display period for election signs in our bylaw. The process, as I say, we have done this in a rapid fashion, but there has been quite a lot of work done in the last month defining the problems, and you will see in attachment 2 that is set out and options given, just some commentary around background and the options that have been considered. As I mentioned, we have had some limited pre-engagement with some stakeholders, including UMA, which is the Outdoor Media Association of Advertising something, and Go Media. UMA are the industry body that represent commercial companies that use digital and illuminated signage. So we can share more on the engagement that we have done, noting that this has occurred in a period when we were working hard to finalise the report to get it to this meeting. Those parties that have been engaged with will be encouraged, or have been encouraged, to follow progress with this report and submit if necessary if any of their feedback has not been addressed. We have also reviewed and mapped the consents for signage that has been applied for under the district plan. We've also received legal advice on technical aspects such as how to ensure the controls align with the electoral legislation and regulations, including the district plan, and this is covered in section 4 of the report. And one thing we have done is to compare the bylaw controls with the district plan signage rules for temporary signage, just to make sure that we're aligning as best we can the regulatory tools as far as practical. So you will see in the attachment 1, the statement of proposal does include the proposed changes to the bylaw and to the administration manual. Moving to the key changes, we are proposing to increase the maximum sign size in the residential zone to 1.5 metres square. It's currently 0.6 metres square, and we have mocked up some core flute signs just showing that difference. And apologies, we were using core flute that we had readily on hand, so the sign is slightly under, but you'll see that is approximately 0.6 or 0.5 of a square metre. Peter's now displaying a 1.5 metre square sign. Thank you, Councillor Wood, very, very nice. So we just thought it would be useful as we've grappled with the issue about what is an appropriate maximum size control to set. It's always difficult to visualise, so we're hoping that helps. And the suggestion for 1.5 metres square has been based off the temporary signage or the signage rules in the district plan. And if you've looked into the district plan, you'll see that there are 2 different sizes, one being 0.6 of a square metre and one being 2.5, and they are set based on the type of road in which the site is located. And at the moment, our control is based off the 0.6 metres squared, which is for residential zones on local roads. We have tried to think carefully about this, and also the advice that we have received on 221B of the Electoral Act. And in a nutshell, and I'll let Peter speak to this more now because I think it's an appropriate time, that we can set sign size as outlined in section 4 of the report. But I will hand on to Peter just to give you a little bit more detail on the implications of that piece of legislation.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but I certainly can if you would like me to. Section 221...
No, you can do the brief part, please.
Thank you. Section 221B has caused some confusion around how it applies to local rules for election signs. So what we did is we obtained some legal advice to gain some clarity for ourselves. As Emery pointed out, in a nutshell, what it means is that the council does have the ability to set the sign size limit in its bylaw. Contrary to what the Electoral Commission has on their website, it doesn't override our rules regarding the maximum size of signs. So that gives council the ability to set what that size should be. Currently in the bylaw, it's 0.6. We've recommended 1.5. But ultimately, any number that you pick is up to you. So if you prefer a different size limit, that is perfectly within your purview. The reason we've chosen the number 1.5 is to try and strike a balance, given, as Emery pointed out, there are 2 different limits in the district plan, depending on the road location, but also recognising that the types of signs that the district plan regulates, temporary signs, are quite different to the type of temporary signs that election signs are. And the district plan does defer to the bylaw for election signs. It says that while they are like temporary signs, they're not treated as temporary signs for the purposes of the district plan. So the size is a matter of preference, balancing a number of different criteria. I think that's reasonably brief, relatively so.
Thank you. All right, questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Anne-Marie and Peter. I guess I'm interested as to why you decided to include 10.12 and 10.13 around a display period, and so that's on page, a display period of 9 weeks and takedown within, by midnight on the day. Is that in response to complaints? Like, I didn't understand that that was an issue, so I'm surprised to see that in there, I suppose.
Not in response to complaints necessarily. It was identified at the workshop last month as I suppose, a gap in terms of our controls. Certainly my observation of other councils' election sign controls, most seem to have similar provisions in place. And also we've had some feedback from our development and regulatory teams that they would prefer to see a time frame in which their compliance and enforcement efforts are narrowed, because at the moment there is nothing really to stop people from putting signs up at any stage.
Okay. Why are we not aligning completely with the Electoral Act? Why have you decided to make some change in size but not to align with the Electoral Act? Wouldn't it be simpler for people if we just adopted the provisions of the Electoral Act, so that there's only, because I think if we could be as clear as possible on the rules, that would help people. So is there a good reason for deviating from the Electoral Act?
I think there are. The first point to make is that the Electoral Act doesn't actually give a permission to display a sign up to 3 square metres. That's how the Electoral Commission has interpreted it, but that's actually not what the Act says, and that's what our legal advice has confirmed. However, we could choose to align with what the Electoral Commission is guiding people to do and say 3 square metres. The reasons we haven't, I think, are several. The first one is that for an election campaign period, the number of signs that are being put up is more numerous than what we might find for other types of temporary signs. And if we were to say 3 square metres is the permitted size, then as we're seeing, that's quite a substantial size. With multiple signs on a fence across the city, that's quite a substantial increase in the area of signs across the city. That's not to say that you couldn't have 3 square metres. As I said, that is perfectly possible, but we felt that 1.5 strikes a balance between the two numbers that have been provided in the district plan to allow for some increase, but not to extend it too far.
Okay, so can I just test some scenarios on you to see if I've interpreted it correctly? So under the proposed bylaw, would a candidate standing for local election be able to use one of the large billboards that isn't electronic? So, for example, the one on the corner of Main Street and Grey Street. No, not Grey Street. What is it? Princess Street.
Yeah.
Would that be excluded or included? Because I actually couldn't work it out from reading the bylaw.
So Anne-Marie can jump in here if I've misinterpreted this, but we're referring here to clause 10.8. So these are for the maximum sizes of signs based on zone. We've proposed 1.5 for the residential zone. For the local business, rural and institutional zones, the maximum size is 10 metres squared. It does go up to the inner business, outer business, fringe business, etc., to 18 metres squared. That gives a substantial area for size. For signs which are illuminated or digital signs, and so this can include a commercial billboard which is externally illuminated, provided they have a resource consent, that would be permitted. And in most cases, commercial billboards which are subject to a resource consent will be illuminated because they're intending for their signs to be visible at night as well as during the day. So they are permitted under clause 10.9. So I think the key characteristic for those types of billboards would be that they are illuminated.
Okay,
they have a light shining on them.
So if it's not illuminated, it wouldn't be permitted, is that what you're saying?
It would be subject to those other size limits.
Of 1.5?
18 metres, depending
18
on the zone.
metres.
Yeah.
Okay, so the example that I gave you then, would that be permitted or not? Because I still haven't really heard the answer.
Off the top of my head, if it has a light shining up at it, then it would be covered under 10.9 and it would be permitted.
Yes, do you think that we could do anything to make this clearer? Because, you know, I've been in this game a long time, not just as a councillor, but before that, and it's incredibly difficult to interpret this bylaw, I find. And I wonder, could we do anything with this proposal to make it a bit easier? Anything more?
It's a very good question. At the simplest, you can take out all the rules altogether and leave it to the market effectively to determine what is and what's not going to work. I think what we've tried to do is strike a balance. As you know, it's always difficult to create something that is going to be abundantly clear. With a lot of these issues, what we're trying to manage is the interface between the Electoral Act, the district plan and the bylaw. And that means there are going to be some fuzzy edges. We've tried to clarify that as much as we think is possible. Part of the challenge we struggle with is when you make things abundantly clear by setting some very hard limits, you potentially exclude situations that you want to include or potentially include things that you want to exclude. So it's a very hard situation for us to be in because some of those scenarios you describe, we can address those, but then there are other scenarios which we may not think about that then become issues down the track.
Okay, so in 4.11 in your own paper, you acknowledge that there's a risk in adopting an interpretation that differs from the Electoral Commission. People may rely on guidance from the Electoral Commission and be confused. This could lead to pushback due to different interpretations, including potentially a legal challenge. So why are we persisting with different advice?
I think the way I would characterise that is we're weighing up two different situations here. On the one hand, there is a risk of pushback. Some candidates may say, the Electoral Commission has said 3 metres squared, why can't we have that? So we do have that risk of pushback, but I would note that we have not had significant complaints around the residential 0.6 metres squared size limit to date. There hasn't been a significant issue, particularly around general elections. The other thing that we're weighing up, though, is we are not just looking at that risk, but also the risks of sign proliferation. So we're trying to manage those as well. It's not a one or the other. I think it's trying to strike that balance across those fields.
Okay, I'll leave it to others at this point.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And on similar lines to Councillor Johnson, I might start on 10.9. Would it not be simpler just to say election advertisements can be displayed on signs as long as they're not located in the residential zone, exceed 3 metres squared, and have been granted resource consent? Why do we need to be as prescriptive as digital or illuminated? Who cares if Go Media's got a sign that isn't illuminated? Why have we chosen to be that prescriptive?
Through the chair. I suppose there's a number of reasons. It recognises that there are different types of sign types, I suppose at the moment, as the bylaw prohibits digital and illuminated signs, we've tried to make a distinction in 10.8 in terms of, like, I suppose factoring in the typical signs that you would see, the signs on supported structures or affixed to a building or structure such as a wall, and this kind of new category of signage, which is appearing more frequently in our environment, but is quite different.
Sorry, just to be, I understand 10.8. My questions are really specifically on 10.9. How it reads at the moment is if you have a sign that has a resource consent, but it's not illuminated, you can't put it up there. Should we not just say if it's got a resource consent, it's all right? Why would we specifically define resource consented signs that aren't digital or aren't illuminated doesn't that open us up for the same confusion we've already had? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just specifically on 10.9,
fair question. I think our research on the consented signs was quite revealing in that some of the digital and illuminated signs that we have may not have a resource consent. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important in terms of trying to manage the effects of those signs and bearing in mind that these are very, very large signs, and in the attachment to the report you will see that one of the digital and illuminated signs is 36 metres squared. So it is quite a different I suppose type of control that we haven't that we're trying to, I suppose, seek better clarity about, but the onus would be on those owners of those commercially owned billboards that they have the necessary resource consent that lawfully establishes those signs.
Okay, that's fine, we can amend that. So on the 0.6 up to 1.5 square metre suggestion on residential, the status quo at the moment in the city is that over central government elections, parties put up 3 square metre signs on residential properties because we've gone with the interpretation of the Electoral Commission. And so what you're suggesting is a diversion from the status quo for central, that we go down to 1.5, and a diversion from the status quo for residential, that we go up to 1.5. Could we, in the bylaw, simply enshrine the status quo by saying for local government elections, I don't think any councils particularly want 1.5 square metre signs for local government elections, could we just not enshrine in the bylaw that for local government elections you can have up to 0.6 in residential, and for central government elections you can have up to 3 square metres, and therefore we're just maintaining what we've done for the last couple of decades?
Through the chair, yes, and that is an option outlined in our analysis. However, we took on board the feedback that we wanted to, I suppose, try and make this as clear as possible and not have different controls for local elections compared to general elections. So again, we were trying to hit, I suppose, the sweet spot with the sign size, which reflected both the guidance that the Electoral Commission has provided and with our own district plan.
Thank you, I appreciate that. On the written consent requirements, which I apologise, I can't recall what the clause number was, what current rules stop me just putting a sign up on every fence in the city? What private property rights do people have to agree or not agree to having a sign on their fence?
Through the chair, I'm not able to answer that question. I'm wondering if legal counsel may be able to help.
But perhaps I could ask a more general question in that at the moment the status quo is you can't just put a sign up on somebody's fence without consent. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I would expect that is a situation, but I don't know for sure whether that is the practice.
Sorry, the compliance team within development and regulatory monitor these kinds of things within their resource, and my understanding is that it is responsive to complaints and that kind and the like as well.
So there are current rules that meant if I wanted to put a sign up in somebody's house and they didn't consent to it, I wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Within the district plan, there are rules around that as well, yeah.
Excellent. So in terms of enforcing a written consent rule, that would only come up if somebody hadn't consented to having that sign on their fence in the first place and then contacted council asking council to contact the candidate to remove it. Is that not already the status quo, and therefore why would we create an additional bylaw that's effectively redundant?
Through the chair, I'm still not sure whether that is status quo. I would, I suppose, fall back on common courtesy around using someone else's private property to display signage. So yes, I think it is just trying to introduce and also perhaps give landowners, property owners, the opportunity to say yes or to say no. Some may hold, political preferences, and I think I have outlined in the analysis that is placing a form of control, I suppose, in terms of whether or not that owner permission is granted or not.
All right, my final line of questioning then is on 10.12 around introducing a period of which election signs be displayed. At the moment, the definition of an election sign is something that's persuading a person to vote for an individual or a party. It doesn't, under the status quo, if you wanted to put a sign up for public meeting 2 years before the election, it doesn't really matter because there's no rule constraining election signs. Under this bylaw, it would force council to interpret whether a sign design met the requirements of being an election advertisement. How would we, so if the Purple Party was to hold a public meeting with one of their spokespeople 2 years out from an election, clearly the purpose of that public meeting would be to encourage them to vote for that party and for their respective candidate. What mechanism is council going to use to determine whether a sign meets that threshold or not? And does this not introduce a considerable level of complexity to the bylaw that doesn't currently exist?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that it introduces additional complexity. I think what it does is it states a very clear period when election signs are allowed to be put up. The second part, though, relates to how we define election signs. So we have proposed in the amendments to bolster the definition of election signs. So we refer to definitions from the Electoral Act around election advertisements, and they have corresponding subsidiary definitions for a party advertisement and a candidate advertisement. That reflects the general election focus of that Act. The intent is to try and put the emphasis on signs which are promoting a person to vote for a person or a party in an election, a by-election or a referendum. There are some, dare I say it, grey areas in the space where where signs may be put up that have the appearance of being election signs, but it is a matter of perspective as to how close to the line they've skated. And this is a challenge for us because, as I pointed out to a previous question, the tighter you make the definition, you may provide greater clarity, but you also potentially exclude or include things that you hadn't intended. So it's trying to strike that balance so we don't create a different problem while we try to solve one other.
So to test this new rule then, if Labour's in government and they've promised to build a new Palmerston North hospital and they put a sign up outside saying we're building a new hospital with the MP's face on it and the party logo on it, is that encouraging someone or persuading someone to vote for a party or an individual, or is that for information and therefore it's not an election sign?
At the risk of speaking for others who would be making these decisions, there are factors that will probably be taken into account when making that assessment. If there was an explicit reference to an election, then that creates a stronger case that it's an election sign. If there's no reference to voting for anything or voting for any person, then possibly that weighs that assessment down against it being an election sign. I don't know that there is a hard way to stipulate it in a hard and fast rule. But in that scenario there, if there was no reference to an election, if there was no reference to voting for this particular person or particular party, then you might make the argument that no, it's not an election sign.
Okay, so then my...
So just, we've got a supplementary response.
Kerry Lee, General Manager, Development and Regulatory. To your response, Councillor Wood, from a regulatory perspective, yes, it does introduce further complexities. It's an issue that we're grappling at the moment. When is an election sign an election sign, when it is not?
And so then my final question that leaves me with is the only mechanism council has for enforcing a bylaw is through the courts and through prosecution. So if a party put up a sign that they deemed was an election sign and council deemed was, our only mechanism of retribution would be through prosecution of that party or that individual for their election sign.
In summary, yes, but there are some other steps that can be taken. We can approach them and require them to take it down. There are provisions under the Local Government Act involving seizure of equipment involved in the commission of an offence. So it may be possible, subject to legal advice, to remove materials which are in a public place. But those are steps that would probably be quite extreme.
I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor. I'll have some amendments for you shortly.
Right, okay. I can sense we're going to go on for a while. I've got an appointment I need to be at. So I'm going to adjourn. So we'll have our lunch now, break. We're back at the Missoula room at 1:30. You've got slightly longer time, 1 hour and 15. And we're having the airport session there. So I'm going to adjourn this meeting till 2:30 p.m. And then we'll come back to full council then. And we'll carry on with those questions. Thank you.